Patriots, what if I told you that one of the most overlooked Federalist Papers is basically a blueprint for how the federal government pays for everything it does, including enforcement power, bureaucracy, and yes, the kind of regulation by taxation that gun owners have been fighting for decades? Well, today we're going to break down Federalist 36, written by Alexander Hamilton, and we're going to do it in the way that we always do here on the channel. Straight, thorough, and with the modern implications spelled out, especially the implications for the Second Amendment. Because here's the truth. If the government can fund it, it can build it. And if it can build it, it can enforce it. And if it can enforce it, it can pressure our rights, sometimes without ever passing a direct ban. So let's get into it. Hey everybody, my name is Jared. This is Guns and Gadgets, your premier source for Second Amendment news and constitutional commentary. If you appreciate deep dives like this into the history that many people overlook, have forgotten, or still don't know about, hit subscribe and hit the like button and share this with someone who thinks that tax policy has nothing to do with freedom. Federalist 36 is Hamilton responding to a very specific fear from the anti-federalists. If you give the federal government the power to tax, you're going to unleash a swarm of federal tax collectors, federal agents, and federal offices into every town and county, and the states will become irrelevant. That's the anxiety. And to be fair, after living under the British Crown, tax collectors didn't exactly have a good reputation in America. And Hamilton's mission in Federalist 36 is to calm people down and argue three main ideas. Number one, the federal government must have reliable revenue. Number two, federal taxation doesn't require an army of federal taxmen, and we have an army now. And three, the new system can use existing state infrastructure to collect taxes, reducing friction and bureaucracy. But there's also a deeper layer. Hamilton is defending the practical mechanics of federal power. Not just can Congress tax, but how does a federal government function in the real world? And that's where the modern relevance kicks in. Hamilton's argument is blunt. A government can't be expected to handle national responsibilities if it doesn't control national revenue. And under the Articles of Confederation, Congress had to ask states for money, basically requisitions. And states often didn't pay, or didn't pay enough, or they paid late. That created weakness, unpaid soldiers, unpaid debts, and no consistent way to fund national defense or stability. So Hamilton's message is, if the federal government is responsible for national defense, it needs the ability to raise money. And if it's responsible for paying national debts, it needs reliable revenue. And if it's responsible for running the union, it can't depend on optional contributions. And that sounds reasonable until you apply the second half of the equation. Power plus funding plus permanence equals capacity. And capacity is what eventually becomes the machinery that can be turned against liberty if it's not restrained. So Hamilton is selling necessity, because in a sense it was necessary for a functioning union. The real question becomes what restraints exist to prevent abuse. And hold that thought. We'll come back to that when we tie this into the Second Amendment. A major anti-federalist talking point was federal taxes will mean federal collectors everywhere, a standing army of bureaucrats. Well, Hamilton says essentially, look guys, relax. Most taxes can be collected without creating a massive new federal workforce. He argues that state governments already have tax systems, tax officers, assessment methods, and knowledge of local property and commerce. So instead of inventing a brand new federal army of collectors, what would he state today? Then the federal government can rely heavily on existing state structures or minimal federal administration layered on top. Hamilton's pitch is efficiency and familiarity, and states already know how to do this. Now, and this is important, Hamilton is not saying the federal government can't create its own tax apparatus. He's saying it likely won't need to, and that political reality will keep it limited. How this Federalist paper has been bastardized, my friends. That's a key theme in the Federalist Papers. Ambition will counteract ambition, and practical pressures will limit excess. But again, here's the tension. Hamilton is arguing from expectation. The Constitution is about authority. And if the authority exists, the question becomes what happens when political culture changes. What happens when limited becomes expanded and temporary becomes permanent? And that's not a modern question, that's a founding era central question. And Hamilton talks about different categories of taxation. He expects the federal government to lean primarily on external taxes like duties, which is taxes on imports, and other forms of revenue tied to international commerce, tariffs. Why? Because those are easy to collect at ports, simpler to administer, and less intrusive across the entire country. Internal taxes, like direct taxes on land or head taxes, he treats as more politically sensitive and more complicated. He suggests they be used when necessary, especially in emergencies like war. And this matters because it reveals something. Hamilton is saying, we'll have the power to tax broadly, but we'll use it in a way that's politically survivable. And that's not the same thing as we'll never use it intrusively. And when we talk about the Second Amendment, gun owners know exactly how we won't use it that way eventually turns up into we're using it that way. So where does the Second Amendment come in? Well, Federalist 36 doesn't mention the Second Amendment directly. It's about taxation mechanics, but the link is structural. The government can shape behavior not only by banning something, but by pricing it out, or taxing it out, or burdening it, or creating compliance costs so heavy that the right becomes a privilege. That's not theory, it's history. You can regulate without calling it regulation by using fees, licensing costs, special taxes, administrative friction, and enforcement funding streams. And for gun owners, the most obvious historical example is how taxation has been used around arms. Taxation and fees as gatekeeping mechanisms, pay-to-play schemes, and systems where the people who can afford the costs get the rights, and everyone else gets paperwork and denial. Now, Hamilton's defense of broad taxing authority is fundamentally a defense of a powerful national government. That power can be used for good or ill, depending on constraints and political culture. And even when a law is on the books, it only matters if government has the capacity to enforce it. So taxation creates agencies, staffing, databases, compliance systems, and interlocking bureaucracies. And once those exist, they rarely shrink. And they tend to expand just to justify their budgets. And then they search for new missions. And from a Second Amendment perspective, that matters because enforcement is often where the rubber meets the road. Paperwork enforcement, technicalities, administrative denials, and selective prosecution. Now, the right can be chilled without a single dramatic headline. The founding generation wanted a government energetic enough to defend a nation, but restrained enough not to become what they fought. Hamilton's often the energy guy. He wants a government that can act. The Second Amendment, alongside state sovereignty and separation of powers, functions as part of the broader liberty architecture, an ultimate reminder that the people are not powerless. You can't separate how government gets money from how government exercises power. And Hamilton's argument in Federalist 36 includes a lot of "this is unlikely" language, unnecessary to create swarms of officers, be politically costly or inconvenient, and so on. And I want to be fair. In the founding context, he's responding to fears that the federal government would immediately crush the states and flood the countryside with federal collectors. But as gun owners, we're trained, by experience, to translate political promises into a simple question. Do they have the authority? Because if they have the authority, then it becomes a question of time, politics, and incentives. So, what were the actual guardrails? Well, elections and representation, where Congress had to answer to voters, or federalism, where states retain power and they compete politically as well. And then there's the separation of powers, where Congress taxes, executives enforce, and courts interpret. But then there was the rights protections, the Bill of Rights, including the Second Amendment. They set boundaries that government is not supposed to cross. The problem is those guardrails require a culture that respects them. If institutions reinterpret or ignore them, your only real protection becomes resistance through lawful means. Political, legal, civic, and as the founders understood, ultimately, the fact that the people are not disarmed subjects. That is the philosophical intersection. If you read Federalist 36 as a gun owner in the modern era, you should walk away with 3 key takeaways. 1, administrative reality is where rights live or die. Hamilton is talking about mechanics, when the collection methods, officers, bureaucracy, and that's exactly where modern rights fights happen too. Not in lofty speeches, but in agencies, rules, fees, delays, and enforcement priorities. And then, takeaway 2, taxation can be used as a workaround when bans fail. When a right is clearly protected, lawmakers sometimes reach for indirect pressure. Make it expensive, make it complicated, make it slow, make it more compliance risky, or make mistakes punishable. And that doesn't always look like a ban, but the effect can be similar. And then takeaway 3, the Second Amendment is part of the founders' anti-tyranny architecture. Hamilton wants government capacity. The Bill of Rights, especially the Second Amendment, exists to ensure capacity does not become domination. In other words, Federalist 36 is about funding the state. The Second Amendment is about ensuring the people never become subjects of the state. Federalist 36 is one of those papers where most people skip it because it sounds like accounting and it's boring. But it's not just accounting. It's the engine room of power. Because every national solution, every federal program, every enforcement regime, every agency rule, none of it exists without money. Hamilton argued that a functioning union required the federal power of taxation, and he made the best case he could: necessity, efficiency, and minimal bureaucracy. But the founders also knew a hard truth. Power tends to grow. And that's why the Bill of Rights exists. That's why the Second Amendment matters, not as a hobby, not as a preference, but as a safeguard, rooted in the founding understanding of human nature and government. If you're tired of being lectured by companies, my friends, that hate us and our values, it's time to switch your coffee to Blackout Coffee. It's an American-owned, unapologetically pro-freedom company, and they are actually believers in the Constitution, especially the Second Amendment. This isn't woke corporate sludge. It's premium small batch roasted coffee that tastes incredible, and it supports American jobs. Go to blackoutcoffee.com/GNG. Use my code GNG10 for 10% off your order, and drink coffee that stands for what we believe in. Patriots, if you found value in this breakdown, if you love this series, then please do me a favor. Hit the like button so that YouTube sends this to more Americans. Hit subscribe, double check your subscription as well, and share this. It helps more than you know. And if you want to support the channel, check the description for ways to do that. As always, stay vigilant, stay informed, stay armed, and stay free. I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.